We're now going to start work on the other segment with the cutout in it. So I'm going to come up here and select our mesh layer, click the eye next to it, and then hide our main segments layer. I'm then going to come along into the back view and move all of these polygons into position on the x-axis, like that. With that done, I'm going to come back to the right view and we'll take a look at what we're doing. So I'm going to drop that tool. Now we obviously need to add in detail to this model in order to get those cutouts, but instead of adding detail to the entire model at once, it would be better if we could just kind of tackle a little bit and work from that. And the best way I've found of doing that is to grab these two side polygons that make up the side of this object and just delete them. If I quickly go back to a side view, you'll see that this cutout is kind of overlapping these quad triangles as well, so we're going to select those guys and get rid of them. This leaves us with just this top set of polygons that run the entire length of the cutout. So we can add detail to these and then move these into position, which will help us make the shape of the cutout. And then we can fill in the side polys, adding only as many edges as we absolutely need to the bottom section down here. So I'm going to come back into a side view. We're going to start looking at the detail we need to add in. Now you can see here that these edges kind of come up to this vert and not this one, so we can actually delete these guys. So I'm going to lasso select around these edges and hit the backspace key to delete them. Now we're going to start over at this end. The first thing we're going to do is add in a new cut with the slice tool, which is Shift C. We're going to add in a diagonal cut just around about there. Now what I'm looking for is for this vert to be roughly around about there, so I'm just going to move it back a little bit actually. We want that top vert there to be right at the top of this curve. And with that done, I'm quite happy with that. We're going to make a new cut kind of where this curve transitions into this straight line down here. And I'm thinking about there looks pretty good, so I'm just going to cut straight down. Now I'm going to have to do that again because I had an edge selected over here, so it didn't make the cut. So I'm going to try slicing that again, like that. And you see that that time we made the cut. Now we're going to do the same thing at this end. So on the transition between the curve and the straight line, so about here looks good. And what I'm going to do is grab all of these polygons in the middle. I'm just going to pull those down to about there. And this gives us these two straight sections at either end that basically define the boundaries of these curves we have to create. So what I'm going to do is come in and create a one cut in there. Then we're going to select that edge, bevel it, and that'll add in the curve detail that we need. So with these guys selected, I'm going to come in and hit the Alt-C combination for the loop slice tool, right click to activate it, and making sure the value is set to 50, I'm going to hit space to drop the tool. Now we need to move these edges, but where exactly do we move them to? If I was to pull it down here to the edge of the curve and then hit B for bevel, and then activate it, you'll see that as soon as we start to bevel, we're actually pushing out above the curve in kind of this direction here. So what we're going to have to do is move the edge past the reference image, and then when we bevel, it will come up to that point. Now I found the best way to eyeball this, when you're doing it yourself, is to kind of look at the first and last 10% of the curve. And if you were to draw a straight line from the first 10% and a straight line from the last 10%, where those two lines would cross, that's kind of where you want to move the edges to. It's kind of hard to explain like that. It's best kind of shown it practically, which I'll do now. But it's a good method to kind of eyeball it first time. Now before we actually bevel these edges, I'm going to rotate them ever so slightly on the x-axis so that they're kind of pointing out in this direction away from the main body of the curve. And with that done, I'm going to hit the B key for the bevel tool and bevel this ever so slightly out into position. Now I can see I might have gone a little bit too far on this one, but we'll see in a second. I'm going to up the round level to 3 and pull this out slightly, and it doesn't actually look too bad. That's actually pretty close to what we want right there. See, it's kind of following this curve almost exactly. Actually, I'm pretty happy with that, so that's pretty good. So I'm going to hit space to drop the tool, and you can see that we've created all of these new edges that we needed nicely equally spaced. So I'm going to do exactly the same over here on the other side. So we want to add in an extra edge over here. So with some of these edges selected, I'm going to hit Alt-C for the loop slice tool, and with the value set to 50, I'm then going to hit space to drop the tool. And we now need to move it into position. Now, it's a bit easy to see what I was going on about earlier on this curve. Now, if you look at the first 10% of it, and we're to draw a line from that, and then look at the end 10%, and we're to draw a line from that, we're going to move these new edges to where those lines would intersect. So about there looks good. Now I'm just going to rotate these guys just a little bit. And with that done, I'm going to hit space to drop the tool, B for bevel, right click to activate it, and pull out our bevel, again with a round level of about 3. And as you can see, I've definitely gone too far in that previous step. So I'm going to undo, and I'm going to come back and select these edges and just move them back slightly towards that curve on the reference image. So up a bit like that. So now we'll go in and try beveling again, and it's kind of always worth taking some time to try and get this stuff right. I mean, by moving this one edge, it's much easier than moving all of these guys. But I'm pretty happy with that now, so I'm going to hit space to drop the tool. And if I come up into perspective mode, you can see that we've now got this cut out exactly as we want it. Now, before we fill in the side polygons, I'm going to come up and bevel some edges. So I'm going to lasso select around this guy, shift select all of these guys, and then I'm going to hit B for bevel, right click to activate, and draw it out with a round level of 0. So about like that. Then hit space to drop the tool, and I can double click this edge loop, shift double click this edge loop, and then you can hit P to fill in those polys. Now there's something a little bit funky going on here. If you look through here, you can see the other side of the poly, and the same is true for the other side as well. So both of these polys are in fact flipped around. Now if you go into polygon mode, so hit 3, directly after you use that P command to create a new poly, it will have added the new polys to the last poly selection you had. So in this case I've got the 2 new ones selected and also these other ones which I don't want. So I'm going to hold down Control and remove these from the current selection. And repeat that until we just have the polygons that we want. Then with just those 2 selected, I'm going to hit the F key twice to flip them the correct way round. Now we can go in and start creating some cuts to give us our quad polygons. So we're going to come in and start making those cuts. Now any cuts that we make on one side of the object, we're going to have to make on the other. So actually I think what we'll do is we'll double click to select this entire object. And under center selected on the basic menu, I'm going to click the X button. And what this will do is move the entire selected object to 0 on the X axis. And we can save some time by turning on symmetry X. And this means that any cuts we make on one side will automatically be made on the other side as well. And that will just save us a little bit of time. So I'm going to check our symmetry by creating one cut here and having a look on the other side. Something's definitely not quite happy around there. So what is going on? Well, let's take a look. Well, a good way to make sure that our mesh is entirely symmetrical is to select one of these edges and loop slice right down the middle like that, and then hit space to drop the tool. And we're going to basically delete half of the entire mesh. So I'm going to select 2 polygons along this side and hit the L key to loop them and delete it. Now if I was to come in and double click this section, it's not attached to the rest of the mesh, so I can just hit delete to get rid of it. Now I'm going to make sure that this edge loop is exactly at 0 on the x-axis by coming up to vertex set position. And this is different from the center selected tool, because that tool would take a circle and move it so its midpoint was at 0 on your chosen axis, so its points would maintain their relationship to each other. Whereas the set position tool would basically take that circle and squash it down into a line and then put that line at a certain point on the axis you choose. So it would basically scale it all down. So that's the one that we want to use here. So I'm going to select that tool, and on the x-axis I'm going to set it to 0 and hit OK, and you can see some of these guys jump into the correct position. Now I'm going to double click to select the entire mesh. I'm going to come up to duplicate and mirror, and we're going to mirror it across the x-axis, so I'm just going to come down and hit apply. And now if everything worked correctly, I should be able to double click one side and it will automatically select the other. You won't have to come in and merge any vertices or anything like that. We can then double click this middle edge loop and hit backspace to delete it. And now just quickly to test, I'm going to come over here and create an extra cut. And you can see that now it's creating it on the other side as well. So symmetry is well and truly fixed. So now we can go ahead and create the other cuts. And just carry on adding in some extra detail. Now we've got all of these edges here, but we've got no edges down at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is select one of these edges. Then we can just hit Alt-C for the loop slice tool and add an extra edge in. Now what we can do is create a quad polygon and a triangle quad. Now we can come along to this side and we've got two in there. So I'm actually going to go to a side view, and with the slice tool, which is Shift-C, I'm going to add an extra slice in around about there. And this means that when we create some polygons around this area, we won't have to stretch their edges all the way across this section here. And instead we'll be able to terminate them quite close to this corner, which is always a good thing. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 there. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. We have the same issue around about here. So I'm going to add an extra edge in the middle. Out there looks pretty cool. So to quad up these. And then we'll just do a couple more. So we'll bring that down to about there. And then I'll do that, but that will leave us with a 5-sided polygon there to deal with. So I think we'll make that into a quad and a tri. So a quad there and a tri there. Now obviously thanks to symmetry, all of this is being done on the other side as well, which saves us a whole bunch of time. So all that's left for us to do is to come in and double click both of these edge loops, B for bevel, right click to activate, and we'll just drag out a bevel like that. And our second segment is now complete. So what I'm going to do is select it all again, come into the back view, and we're going to use the move tool to move it back into position. With symmetry off, otherwise it does tend to go a little bit crazy. So I'm going to come up and turn symmetry off. And then we can move it back into position. It should work hopefully a little bit better this time, like that. So now I'm going to hit ctrl-c and ctrl-v to copy and paste. And then I'm going to move the new copy to about there. And then I'll come in and select all of this here. So selecting all of the polygons in this layer. Then I'm going to come up to duplicate and we're going to mirror it over the x-axis. And hit apply. And this adds in these two copies as well. Then I'm going to hit Ctrl-X to cut them all out. And then I can paste them back into our main segments layer. And with that done, if I hit the eye there, we can now delete this empty mesh layer. And now if we go to perspective view, we can see that all of our segments are now in place. For the moment I'm not going to duplicate across this plate and this plate, as it will make things a bit easier when we add and position our tools in. So for now our main segments are done. I am however going to come up and save our scene, so I'm going to click File and Save. And we'll call this 3_segments done and hit save. Okay, so we're now done with the first set of reference images, so I'm going to come up here to our all refs group, toggle it down, and I'm going to hide the set 1 refs and bring in the set 2 refs. Now it might take a second or two for them to load up, but when they do, we'll take a quick look at what we're doing. Now initially you might look at this and feel a little bit overwhelmed and think that it looks ridiculously complicated. We've got a whole bunch of different shapes going on here, and a lot of them are very close together, and it's kind of dense in the middle of it. But ultimately, until the very end of this tutorial, it's actually pretty simple. It's really just a set of boxes. That's all it is. I mean, if you take a look at these sections, all it really is just a kind of squarish, boxish looking polygon. And these are copied across the pedal, like that. You then have a kind of thin section, and those two run all the way across the pedal. And then we've got this bit at the end here, which, you know, is a little bit curved. It's not quite boxy, but it's still fairly simple. So to get on with it, we're going to go into a left view. And we're going to look at how we can create this first shape. Now before we begin, I'm going to hide our main segments layer. And our main side plate is currently highlighted blue, so we can see it. But I'm going to solve that by creating a new mesh item to work in. And we're going to call this blocks. And we're going to start by creating this green object. Now there are a couple ways you could do it. Probably the easiest way for now would be to come up to the polygon menu and select the pen tool. Now the pen tool allows you to basically draw out a polygon. And there are a couple of options down here, and at the moment I've got them all turned off, which is what I want. And I'm just going to come in and start placing some verts around, so you can just basically click on all these corners, and it's an extremely quick way to come in and create this polygon. We've got a little bit of a curve going on there, so for now I'm just going to add a point down there. And with that done, I'm going to hit space to drop the tool, and then we can come in and start fixing this up a little bit. Now first of all, I'm going to cut that up with the edge slice tool to make it a quad, and then going to add an extra edge down the middle here, and then with the move tool I'm going to select that vert and kind of just pull it out just a little bit. I'm going to pull it slightly past the outside of the reference. Just going to quickly tweak these guys a little bit so they match up a little bit more closely, like that. And then I'm going to grab this middle edge and we're just going to bevel it with a round level of, let's try 2. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So I might, at the moment I'm just watching these bottom ones. I'm trying to get all of these verts equally spaced. So something like that. Now if we take a look up here, these verts are not equally spaced at all, so we're going to fix that quickly. I'm going to drop the tool, select these verts here, and that one. I'm just going to scale it slightly on the z-axis, and just pull it that way a little bit. That kind of evens those guys up a little bit more. In fact, I'm going to reselect all of these guys and flatten them on the Y. Now a quick tip is that down here you've got something called negative scale. And at the moment it's checked on, and what this means is that you can grab one of these handles and scale it in a negative direction. So I'm at negative 391. Now this is a good feature, but it's not so handy for when you want to kind of slam things down to 0. So to do that, what you do is, if I turn off the transform tool quickly, I'm going to reactivate it. I'm going to turn off this negative scale checkbox, and then you can just grab this and just slam it down, and all of these will be exactly at 0 on the y-axis. So that's kind of a quick tip, and you can do that in any axis. So with that done, I'm going to deselect and drop the tool. I'm going to go and split these up into quads. So I'm going to add an edge down there. Then I'm going to add one more edge, joining those guys up. And if I come down to the polygons by vertex, you'll see that I've got none with more than 4 verts. So I'm going to double click to select all of these polygons and go to a back view. And this is the green one we were working on, so I'm going to pull it to the side like that, X for the poly extrude, right click, and I'm going to pull that shape out. With that done, I'm going to come into a right view, and you'll see what we're going to do next. Now we've got 5 of these blocks running across the knife, and we've made the green one, which you can see in the background is this big blocky one, but we've also got this pink one, which is in front. You can just see a bit of the yellow one behind it. And you've got this light blue one and this red one, and they all have different top profiles, but they're ridiculously easy to make. We're just going to make a couple of extra slices and move some verts into position. So to do that, I'm going to come into perspective, double click to grab this mesh, come into a top view, and we'll start by copying with ctrl-c, ctrl-v to paste, and we'll make the red one. So with that selected, I'm going to go back to perspective. Now, both of these objects are in the same mesh layer, they're in the blocks mesh item, but we only want to work on this guy, so the one kind of closest to the inside of the pedal, and ideally I want to get rid of this guy for the minute, and we can use Modo's hide function to do that. Now what I'm going to do is double click the one that we don't want to see, and click H on my keyboard, and that'll hide it. To unhide, you click the U key. Now there's also a hide unselected option, so if we click this one and click Shift H, you hide everything that isn't selected, and then U will bring it back. So at the moment we want this one hidden, so I'm going to select it and click H. So we're just going to work on this red one. I'm going to go into a right view, we're going to see what we're working with. Now we've got the same profile up until about this point, so I'm going to create a slice down the middle there. Then we've got another hard edge here, so we're going to need another corner, like that. And then we should be able to just pull this vert down to the correct level. So what I'm going to do is grab both of these guys and pull them down to there. And that is actually the red one done. There's no more to it than that. So go back to the perspective, unhide with the U key, we'll double click this guy, go to the top view, ctrl-c, ctrl-v to copy and paste, and then we'll move on to the next one. So it really is just a case of tweaking some verts here. So just going to line that up nicely. Back to perspective mode. I've got this one selected, so I want to hide all of the unselected items. So I'm going to hit Shift H, so we just get this one. go back to the right view, and this one is the light blue one. So I'm going to move this vert to these corners here, just about there. Then this vert is in the correct position because you can just about see the blue line kind of coming up to that point, but this part here is clearly in the wrong place. So I'm going to lasso select around both of these verts, and because we're working on both sides of the object, I've actually got 4 selected. Activate the move tool. I'm just going to pull those down to that corner there. If I double click, you can see that we've now got the blue one in position. So back to perspective. I'm just going to check that everything looks good. So into the top view, ctrl-c to copy, ctrl-v to paste, move over for the yellow one. Then we'll go back to perspective, unhide with the U key. Then we want to hide everything that isn't selected, so I'm going to Shift H, so we're just working on the yellow one. Back to the right side, and it really is just as simple as that, really. It's just repeating over and over and over again. But in this one, it looks like we've got a line coming from this point straight up to this point, so we don't actually need this edge in this one. So I'm going to space to drop the transform tool. I'm going to double click this edge loop in edges mode and just hit backspace to get rid of it. And if I double click, we might have to just move these edges, these verts, sorry, just down ever so slightly. But if I double click now, you see that the yellow one is in place. So we've got one more to do, so I'm going to go to perspective mode just to check that that worked as well. And it did, which is cool. So U to unhide everything. Go to the top view, Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V, and we can make this pinkish one, which is the last one, and then we'll be done. So I'm just going to double click this new one and hit Shift H to hide the rest. I'll go into a right view and take a look at what we've got to do. Now, for starters, we've got to move this vert down to about this level. So I'm going to lasso select that guy and move it down a little bit, like that. We then need to re-add back in an edge along here. So I'm going to use the slice tool for that. So I'm going to add all the way down. Maybe move this top one just a little bit, like that. And then we can grab these verts and move them up into position. Ooh. Just on the y-axis like that, or using this red circle here, which moves only in the z and the y-axis. You just want to make sure it's not coming towards you, that's the only thing. That looks pretty good. And then we're going to move these guys down around here. So I'm going to select these edges here, W for the move, and just pull them into position. Now I'm going to introduce you to another tool quickly. We've got these verts here which are connected to this edge, but I prefer it if they were kind of directly underneath it. It just kind of clears things up and makes the mesh look a little bit more attractive. However, we've got this nice kind of straight line running all the way down the bottom of this block. I don't want to come in with the move tool and move these about and kind of risk making that line kind of a little bit bumpy and stuff like that. And there is a good tool to do this. I'm going to go to perspective mode quickly. The tool is up here in the edge menu, and it's called slide. So I'm going to click that guy, and what slide does is it moves these verts along the existing edges, and of course any edges that are in between those verts. So what I can do is left click and drag, and you see that we're moving those verts along that pre-existing edge. And this is a really useful thing because you keep that slope exactly as it is, you're just changing the position of the verts on it. So something like that looks pretty good. Space to drop the slide tool, U to bring back everything else, and then we can just double check that everything's in position. I'm going to come to a right view, and everything looks pretty good. I think that's the first block's done. So we're going to come in and start beveling. Now I'm going to look at an easy way to get all of the edges that we want, and it seems like it would be much easier, instead of selecting all of the edges that we need to bevel, to select all of the edges and then simply deselect the ones we don't want. So I'm going to go into a side view, hold down Control and just lasso select around some of these guys. Now remove them from the current selection. So lasso select, just get rid of these. We obviously want to add as fewer polys as possible, so we want to bevel as fewer edges as we can. But that looks about right, so I'm going to hit B for bevel, right click, and drag out a small bevel with a round level of 0. So that looks pretty good to me, so space to drop the tool. Now I can see in here that we've got this 5-sided poly, and they seem to be on all of these corners. Now what I'm going to do is, instead of manually splitting those up, I'm going to select them all by coming to the statistics panel and clicking the plus next to more than 4 verts, like that. So you can see we've got 20 polygons with more than 4 verts, and you can see them all selected here. And I'm going to come up to the polygon menu, and we're going to use the triple command. And if you click it, you'll notice that the triple command basically converts all of those polys into tris, which is perfect for what we're doing, so that looks good. So I'm going to hit space to drop the tool. Now you can see we've got a little bit of a smoothing error going on some of these surfaces up here. It's a little bit of a kind of gradient between a grey and a kind of lighter grey there. And you can solve this a couple of ways, but a way that I normally use would be to select a couple of these polys, like this, so next to each other. With them all selected, I'm going to hit L, so that we loop the sides of all of these blocks. I'll then hit B for bevel, right click, and we're just going to inset these ever so slightly, like that. And this adds an extra set of polys along either side of this edge, and that gets rid of that smoothing problem for us. So these are our first blocks completely done. We're now going to move on to creating these other blocks with this kind of circular end, and you'll notice if we go into the main segments layer and toggle that on, that these end polygons match it almost exactly. So instead of creating this all from scratch, we're going to go in and kind of cannibalize a couple of the polygons we've already made for our main segments layer. So I'm going to go into perspective mode, click on the main segments layer, come in, and I'm going to select some of these polygons. So I've selected a few in a row, and I'm going to hit the up key to keep selecting around. I want to get about that many, so we've got these two big ones at the bottom as well. I'm going to hit ctrl-c to copy. I'm going to come into our blocks layer and hide our main segments, and then click ctrl-v to paste that in. Now if we go into the right view and take a look at what we've got, you'll see that these verts don't match exactly, but they're pretty close, so we'll be able to tweak them quite easily into position. First of all, I'm going to delete these extra polygons we don't need at the top, so I'm going to lasso select those and hit delete. Then I'm going to go into vertex mode and select these verts here. I'm going to activate the scale tool with the R key, and now I'm going to move it so that it's centered around this vert. So I'm going to right click just on top of that vert there, and this moves the gimbal, so when we scale now on the Z axis, we scale from this point, and what I'm looking is just to get that top vert lined up with this curve here. So that looks pretty good. So I'm happy with that, so I'm going to hit space to drop the tool. Now we can go in and take a look at what we've got. So we're going to use the edge extend tool to basically bring this edge around and create all of these extra shapes. So still in our right view, I'm going to switch to edges mode. So still in our right view, I'm going to switch to edges mode with the 2 key. I'm going to lasso select around this top vert. Then we're going to use the edge extend tool, which is the Z key on your keyboard. Right click to activate and pull that out into position. Now I'm going to shift click to reactivate it, and then you can drag out that new edge and position it. And it's really just a case of shift clicking to reactivate the tool and kind of positioning it like that. Shift click again, pull it out, shift click again, up and over like that. You can zoom in a little bit. Shift click again, and one more time, down like that. And then if we go to perspective mode, give it a second, you can see we've got that shape entirely created. Now before we get too far along, I'm going to double click this, and we're going to move and scale it into position. If we go to the top view, we're creating the red object, so I'm going to move this on the x-axis to the middle, like that. Then use the scale tool to scale this out to the correct size, like that. We can now go on and start creating the rod that comes out of this object. Now first of all, I'm going to grab this edge in here. I'm going to go into a side view. I'm going to move this guy so it's in line with these two verts here. So something like that. And then going to select all of these verts there. And with the scale tool, I'm going to make sure the negative scale option is unchecked, and then slam that down on the blue axis so they're all perfectly in line. I'm going to come back to perspective mode and select these verts in a clockwise direction and hit P. That gives us an extra polygon in there, which we can extrude out to make that rod. So I'm going to go into a side view, activate the extrude tool with the X key, right click to activate it, and then just pull that out on the Z axis like that. So I'm going to hit space to drop the tool, go back to perspective to take a look at what we've got. Okay, now I'm going to come in and fill in these holes here. So I'm going to double click this edge loop and hit P, which fills in there. And then going to click off, double click this edge loop and hit P again. You notice on the second one we don't see anything, and that's because the polygon is flipped around. Now if we go straight into polygon mode, the two polygons we just created with the P command will be selected. So what we can do is just control click this one and then hit F twice to flip this one around, and then you can see them perfectly. And then I'm going to come in and delete both of these edges like that, which basically gives us this giant polygon on either side of this object. Now before we start adding in all of our bevels, I'm going to go to a side view, and you'll notice that we've got this yellow item here which is a slightly different shape to this red one, and it's always easier to reshape these things if you haven't already added in some bevels. So at this point I'm going to double click our mesh to select it all, then I'm going to copy it with ctrl-c and paste it into a new mesh layer. I'm going to come back to our blocks layer and just hide that new one just for now. Now we can go in and start adding in some bevels. Now an easy way to do this would be to double click the layer, so we're selecting all of the polygons. I'm going to hold down Alt on my keyboard and come up here to the Convert to Edges option, and you click that and we'll be in Edges mode with all of these edges selected. Then we can come around to the back, hold down Control, we can just get rid of some of these edges in this selection. Now the important thing to note is that down here we have two edges that already make up a bevel, so we don't want to bevel these again, so I'm going to get rid of those. We also don't want to bevel either of these edges down here. So with that done, I'm going to hit B, right click and drag us out a slight bevel. So something like about that. Looks pretty good. So I'm going to hit space to drop the tool, and we can go in and start drawing out some quads. So I'm going to do one side first. So draw some edges up there and to there as well, and then I'll come around to the other side and do that and draw out these quads. And I think I'll come down to the polygon menu in the statistics panel, get our by vertex down so we can see how many polygons we've got left with more than 4 verts, and then we can go in and start cutting this up a little further. So we've only got one or two down there. We've got 2 verts down there, so I'm going to make a cut across there like that, and then we can make a cut across there. So I'll do the same thing on the other side. So we'll cut across that guy, and then across there, like that. Then we'll make some of these triangular quads. So make 2 of those. So it's the same on this side now. 2 of those, like that. Then we've got 1 vert there, so I'm going to drag from there across to here, and make another triangular vert, and do the same on the other side. We'll drag across from there to there, and make a triangular quad like that. Now we've only got 2. Ooh. Now I did something there. When you click the plus next to one of these options, sometimes it retains the selection you already had. Now in this situation I had this outer loop selected, so it's added some polygons to that. Now I'm going to deselect them by clicking off, and then click this plus again, and you'll see where these are. So Y is this like this. Now you can see down here we've got a vert out of place in there. So what I'm going to do is join this vert to this vert by coming up to the vertex menu and clicking join. OK and OK. And you can see now we've got no polygons with more than 4 verts in them, which is exactly what we want. Now I'm just going to double check everything. Everything looks pretty good. But you can see we've got some shading issues on the side here. And to solve that, we can grab these side polygons, which is a lot easier this time because we don't have any kind of very small quads in there to choose. But with all of these selected, I'm going to hit B for bevel. I'm just going to inset these ever so slightly, just a little bit like that. So I'm using the slider over here. So something like that. I'm going to hit space to drop the tool. You might have to clean up something down there. So you've got some crossed over verts. So I'm going to go into a side view, and lastly select these and drag them out to make that a little bit nicer down there. With that done, we've got this object completed. So we can now copy this into position. So I'm going to go to the top view. I'm going to double click it, hit ctrl-c to copy, ctrl-v to paste. I'm going to activate the move tool and right click somewhere where we can see. I'm going to move that over. I'm going to ctrl-c, ctrl-v to copy and paste again. Reactivate the move tool and right click. Then we're going to skip this yellow one and move straight on over to this blue one, like that. Then I can go back to perspective. Now I'm going to hide our blocks mesh, activate our mesh item down here, and we're going to move this guy into position. So I'm going to go to top view. This is the yellow one, so this guy here with the key fob on it. So I'm going to come over and move that there, like that. Then I can go back to perspective mode and we can start reshaping this to match our reference. So I'm going to go to a right view. Actually, let's go to a left view. So you can kind of see both of the views. The top of this is kind of obscured, but if you follow this line up, you can see we're going to this vert here. So what I can do is grab this top edge and hit the backspace key to delete it. Then we can grab these edges in there and move them slightly right, like that. I'm going to grab this top vert and just move that up into position there. Then we just need to alter this end. So I'm going to grab these end verts, move them out slightly so this end vert is in place. I'll then grab these two top ones and come up to about there. And it's really just a case of just tweaking these into the new position. There's nothing too complicated about it really. That looks pretty good to me. So with that done, we can go back in and we can bevel our edges. So it's exactly the same as before. We're going to select all of the polygons, hold down Alt and convert to edges. We're going to deselect the edges we don't want by holding down Control and dragging, like that. Activate the bevel tool with the B key, right click to activate and drag out our bevel. Something around there. And then we can go in and start cutting this up into quads. So it's really exactly the same as before. Now notice on this side, when we added those bevels in, this polygon became flipped. So we're going to have to go in and flip that around. So I'm going to position the camera so it's just inside the mesh, like that. And you can suddenly see this polygon. So we're going to select it and flip it with the F key, like that. Then we can come in and add in those quads. So I'm going to add in all of these cuts exactly like before. Now I've added in all of these cuts on both sides, and the only difference is that I ended up with a try at the very top here. That's because we deleted that extra edge to reshape this object. Now I've also noticed something down here. When I beveled this edge, I beveled it very slightly too far, so that we've got some overlapping verts down here. Now there's two ways we could fix this. We could go in and move these out into position, but instead I'm just going to merge these two verts together. So I'm going to select them both and click join and OK. I'll click OK, and we'll have to do the same to the other side as well. And because they're so close, it doesn't really matter that you're joining them instead of moving them out. So there you go. So I'm now going to grab all of these side polygons and we're going to inset them to sort out that smoothing problem. So do that on this side as well. So grab all of these side polys, B for bevel, right click, and then we're just going to inset this ever so slightly to about there. And we can have one final check just to make sure that everything's looking as it should, which it does. That's pretty cool. So I'm going to select all of this mesh, Control X to cut, activate our blocks layer and reselect it, and then paste to paste that into position. Now the final thing we're going to do in this tutorial is create this pink rod that runs down the side, and if I go into a left view, you'll see that it doesn't have the curved end to it. It is just essentially a beveled box. To do that, we're going to go to the perspective view. I'm going to double click this end mesh here. I'm going to go to a top view. I'm going to hit Ctrl-C to copy and Ctrl-V to paste. We're going to move that into position over that end rod. With that done, I'm going to go to perspective view, hit space to drop the tool. We just want to delete all of these end polygons, but obviously we don't want anything else showing, so I'm going to hide all of our unselected mesh by hitting Shift H. And with that done, we can come in and lasso select all of these end polygons and just hit delete to get rid of them. Now if I go into a side view, you'll see that what we've got to do is move these verts into position at this end and then add in that bevel. So what I'm going to do is grab all of these verts here, activate the scale tool with the R key, and with negative scale turned on, I'm just going to slam these down on the Z axis so they're all in a perfectly straight line. With that done, I'm going to move them to the very end of this rod, like that. I'm going to go to perspective view, double click that edge loop, and hit P to create a polygon. With the edge loop still selected, I'm going to activate the bevel tool and right click, and then we can just pull out a bevel to match this side one here. Now all that's left to do is draw in some extra edges to make some quads out of this end bit. So what I'm going to do is activate the edge slice tool with the C key, draw in 2 extra edges coming across like that even. Then I'm going to grab 2 of these edge verts and we're going to join these averaged. So what that does is basically say where's the center of these 2 verts, and then it moves them both there and joins them together as one. So with them both selected, I'm going to click join averaged over in the vertex panel. I'm going to do that for all of these very corner verts. So join averaged, grab these 2 and click join averaged, and then finally these 2 here, click join averaged, and you'll see down in the statistics panel that we have no more polygons with more than 4 verts in them. So that means our rod's done. I'm going to click the U key to unhide everything else, and that's everything we need for our blocks layer. Now in the next tutorial we're going to start by adding in this keyring section here to this middle yellow section, and then we're going to move on to adding in the rest of the tools. So I hope you've enjoyed it so far. Feel free to leave me any comments you have below. If you've got any questions or critiques or anything like that, just give me a shout and I'll try and get back to you. But that's it for part 1. Thanks guys.